Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Montesquieu's Sphere of Laws. Today we're looking at Book 12, which is aspect of Part 2 of his work. Part 2 of Sphere of Laws goes from Books 9 to Book 13. Today, this is the second to last book of the second part. Chapter 12, Book 12, sorry, it says, deals with the question of on the laws that form political liberty in relation to the citizen. This is now for the idea of the liberty of the citizen. This is individual liberties, right? The question of individual liberty, the liberties of the citizen. Chapter 11, Book 11 was dealt with the liberty, the political liberty, political liberty in light of the Constitution and the state. Here, this dealt with the question of what we would say call civil liberties, right? It is not enough to treat, this is chapter 1, the idea of the book. It is not enough to treat political liberty in relation to its constitution. It must also be shown in relation to the citizen. I have said that in the former instant, liberty is formed by a certain distribution of the three powers. But in the latter, it must be considered with a different idea in view. It consists in security or in one's opinion of one's security. In other words, therefore, the last book, we looked at the question of the division, the relation of political liberty in terms of the relationship of avoiding despotism in the structure of the type of government, its constitution, its frame, and therefore it focused on the powers, the functions of government, and their and the so-called separation of powers of state, right? The powers of government divided by functionality, what it does, and therefore the relationship of the different powers to each other, and to the degree that they either lead to despotism or avoid despotism, right? That deals with that. Now, this deals with the question here. It consists of the one's own security or the opinions of one's own security, right? So let's continue. It can happen that the Constitution is free and the citizen is not. The citizen can be free and the Constitution not. In these incidents, the Constitution will be free by right, but not in fact. The citizens will be free in fact, but not in right. So therefore, there's a distinction between what is the system. Is the system free? The question something is free in right by the system by law or by principle, or then in fact in reality, right? And this is looking at the Constitution versus the citizen, right? Only the disposition of the laws, and especially of the fundamental laws, forms of liberty in relation to the Constitution. Only the expression of laws, and especially the fundamental laws, forms liberty in relations to the Constitution. But in the relation to the citizens, mores, manners, and received examples can give rise to it, and certain civil laws can favor it, as we shall see in the present book. So therefore, regarding the question of the liberty in the Constitution, therefore, this is the fundamental laws will deal with that. But whereas for the liberty of the citizen, well, in relation to the citizen, what he says, mores, manners, and examples to it, and certain laws, certain civil laws, can do it. And we're going to examine that here in this book. Further, as in most states, liberty is more hampered, countered, or beaten down than is required by their constitution. It is well to speak of the particular laws that is in each constitution that in each constitution can aid or run counter to the principle of liberty of which that each government can admit. So therefore, sometimes what he says that the principle of the Constitution can be this way, but some of the rules and institutions even can run counter to that principle, right? And therefore we're going to have to look at each one. You need to look at the particular cases, he says here. Chapter 2, on the liberty of the citizen. Philosophical liberty consists in the exercise of one's will, or at least, if all systems must be mentioned, in one's opinion that one exerts one's will. So therefore, philosophically means you have the freedom of the will, freedom of choice, or you believe that you can have exercise of free. Political liberty, so that's philosophical liberty. Philosophical liberty means exercise of one's will, freedom of the will, freedom of be able to exercise one's will, or at least the opinion that you can exercise the will. Political liberty consists in security, or at least the opinion one has of one's security. Okay. Um, this security is never more attacked than by public or private accusations. Therefore, the citizen's liberty depends principally on the goodness of the criminal law. So, again, the question of criminal law, the accusation, private or public accusations, and therefore the question has people broken the law. Criminal laws were not perfected all at once. In the very places one most sought liberty, one did not always find it. Aristotle tells us that at Cumae, the accuser's relative could be witnesses. Under the Roman kings, the law was so imperfect that Servilius Tellus pronounced sentence against the children of Anacus Martinus, having accused of having assassinated his father-in-law, the king. Under the first kings of the Franks, Clotaire was made a law that an accused man could not be condemned without being heard, which proves that there was an opposite practice at some particular case or among some barbarian peoples. In other words, they had the right to be heard. This is the first king of the Franks made a law that it could not be condemned without being heard. Therefore, suggests that maybe they were condemned without being heard. Right? It was Chardonas, Charondas, who introduced the judgments against false testimonies. Right? And what is this? This is for Aristotle's Book II. This is when the innocent. Okay, Book II. There's that famous thing at the end of Book II, Chapter 12. Is it 12? I think yes. Book II of the Politics, Chapter 12. Yeah, where he talks about the laws. There's all these different laws that were introduced by different lawgivers. When the innocence of a citizen is not secure, neither is liberty. So that when the innocence of citizens is not secure, their liberty is not secure. The knowledge already acquired in some countries and yet to be acquired in others concerning the surest rules one can observe in criminal judgments, it is more concerned to mankind than anything else in the world. So therefore, the question of criminal justice, the rights of accused, the rights of these privileges, these things, that when people are not secure in terms of accusations of crimes and they can't have sense of knowing what their crimes are, then then there's no liberty in a sense. This is the classical liberal position. Right? Liberty can be found only on the practice of this knowledge, and in a state that had the best possible laws in regards to it. A man against whom proceedings had been brought, and who was to be hung the next day, would be freer than a pasha in Turkey. So this idea here is that you had to have, in other words, that everyone knows what the rules are concerning the surest rules that one can observe in criminal judgments. The clear set procedures, transparent, that not arbitrary. Okay, these kind of concepts. That even a person who is going to be hung, in other words, he says here, liberty can be found in the practice of this knowledge, and in the state that the best possible laws regarding the questions of transparent procedures, things like this, clear procedures, not arbitrary, a man against whom proceedings have been brought and who was about to be hung the next day is going to be freer than the pasha, because the pasha is a man who lives under constant terror and constant situation. He's the rule of absolute power, that there's no order, no law, but his caprice and his will. Right? And this structures that way to go. Chapter 3, continuation of the same subject. The law that sends a man to death on the disposition of a single witness are fatal to liberty. Reason requires two, because a witness who affirms and accuses who deny a witness who affirms and an accused who denies produce a division, and there must be a third for decision. In Greece and in Rome required one additional voice to condemn. Our French law requires two. The Greeks claimed that their usage had been established by the gods, but ours was. In other words, the idea that required one additional voice to require. Now, the Greeks, and that's five, is Orestes or daughter Minerva, and then Dionysus of Hellas said judgments of this is that the Roman law, the judgment of Coriolanus, and so there. This is by their gods, but ours was. He's saying that the French law is superior because it requires two witnesses in that sense. Chapter 4, that liberty is favored by the nature of penalties and by their proportion. It is the triumph of liberty where criminal law draws each penalty from the particular nature of the crime. All arbitrary, in other words, that the penalties connect to the crime. The penalty must match the crime. Right? That's the idea. All arbitrariness ends. The penalty does not ensure from the legislature's capriciousness, but from the nature of the thing. And man does not do violence to man. So therefore, this idea. This idea that this idea that the crime should be balanced, that the penalty should reflect the crime, that they should not be, it should not emerge out of the capriciousness of the lawmaker's will. It must reflect the nature of things, and it does not emphasize. And it is not. The question is not just to do violence to men. He says there are four sorts of crimes. Those of the first kind run counter to religion. Those of the second to mores. The third, tranquility, and those of the fourth, the security of the citizens. The penalties inflicted should derive from the nature of each of these crimes. So the penalty of there's counter to religion, to mores, to tranquility or peace, and then the security of citizens. These are the four levels, right? And the penalties inflicted should derive from the nature of each of these crimes. I include in the class of crimes concerning religion only those that attack it directly, such as all cases of simple sacrilege. For crimes of disturbing the exercise of religion are of the nature of those that one counter to tranquility or the security of the citizens, and should be shifted to those classes. So therefore, in other words, the idea of sacrilege alone is reduced. The crimes that he says disturbing the exercise of religion, this is really not about religion. It's about the violation of tranquility or violation of security. So therefore, even a religious issue, like violating a person's right to religion or interfering with this, is more about the question of violating the third and the fourth, not the first, right? In order for the penalty against simple sacrilege to be drawn from the nature of a thing, it should consist in the deprivation of all the advantages given by religion, expulsion from the temples, deprivation of the society of the faithful for a time or forever, shunning the presence of the sacrilegious, extraction, detestation, and exorcism. So therefore, the penalty should reflect the thing that's the nature of the thing, right? So therefore, it's about practice of religion. It's about sacrilege. Therefore, you're denied access to the holy and that stuff. That's the limiting of it, how it should be in that sense. The thing that disturbs the tranquility or the security of the state, hidden actions are a concern with human justice. In other words, hidden actions of concern of human justice, and things that disturb tranquility and security of state. These hidden actions are of concern of that. But in those that wound a divinity, where there is no public action, there is no criminal matter. It is all between the man and the God who knows the measure and the time of his vengeance. So therefore, very limited. There's this idea that religious crimes or sacrilege requires the public act, and that if there's no public act, then the state or the civil authority has no grounds in this. That has to be left to the God himself, the divinity of themselves. For if the magistrate, confusing things, searches out hidden sacrilege, he brings an inquisition to the kind of action where it is not necessary. He destroys the liberty of citizens by arming against them the zeal of both timid and brash consciousnesses. So therefore, he destroys liberty by arming against them this problem, right? And the ill came from the idea that the divinity must be avenged, but one must make divinity honored, and one must make divinity honored, and one must never avenge it. Indeed, if one were guided by the latter idea, where where would punishments end? In other words, it wouldn't end, right? This idea it'd be endless, right? If you had to avenge the gun. If men's laws were to be avenged by infinite being, they would be ruled by his infinity and not by the weakness, ignorance, and the caprices of human nature. So human nature. The point is that the infinite, perfect God would be able to perfectly enact justice. The problem is human beings are weak, ignorant, and kind of weak-willed, right? Capricious. Human nature is weak and not perfect, not infinite. And because of this, if we are left, this imperfect thing is going to revenge God, revenge the divinity, then this is going to be no end of error. A historian of Provence reports a fact that paints very clearly for us what this idea of avenging a deity can produce in weak spirits. A Jew accused of having blasphemed the Holy Virgin was condemned to be flayed. Masked knights with knives in their hands mounted the scaffold and drove away the executioner in order to avenge the honor of the Holy Virgin themselves. I certainly do not want to anticipate the reader's reflections. In other words, look at this: the idea that instead of that these knights would get on the thing to recover the honor of the Virgin. A second class of crimes, the second class of crimes against Moors. These are the violation of public and individual continence, that is, of the police concerning how one should enjoy the pleasures associated with the use of one's senses and with corporal union. In other words, sex, corporal union, sex. In other words, pleasures and things like this. The penalties for these crimes should also be drawn from the nature of things. Deprivation of the advantages of society has attached to the purity of Moors, fines, shames, and the constraint to hide oneself, public infamy, and the expulsion from the town and from society. Finally, all the penalties within the correctional jurisdiction suffice to repress the timidity of the two sexes. So, therefore, all these penalties that he takes, that we can do what? We can, let's go look at that line. He says that the deprivation of advantage that we have things, fines, public shame, the constraint to hide oneself, right? Public infamy, right? And the expulsion from the towns and from society. Finally, all the penalties within the correctional jurisdiction suffice to repress the timidity of these sexes, right? Social pressure on this to do this, right? Indeed, these things are found less on the wickedness than on forgetting or despising oneself, right? So therefore, it's not we forget ourselves, we hate ourselves. This is what leads us to do these mistakes, these acts. Here it is a question only of crimes that involve Moors alone, not of those that also run counter to public security, such as kidnapping and rape, which are the fourth kind. Okay, so therefore, it's only the question of these crimes, only breaches of mores, social mores, not actions that involve counter to public security. Okay, the crimes of the third class are those that run counter to the citizens' tranquility, and to the penalties for them should be drawn from the nature of the things and relate to that tranquility, such as deprivation, exile, corrections, and other penalties that restore men's troubled spirit and turns them to the established order. I restrict crimes against tranquility to things that are a simple breach of the police. In other words, the simple breach of proper manners, proper mores, in that sense. The ones that disturb tranquility, the ones that, while disturbs tranquility, attacks security at the same time, should be put in the fourth class. So therefore, this is just the ones that attack these more. He says the attack that tranquility. This is what? This is social behavior. This doesn't. In other words, police here means the regulating of behavior, proper association of this. This is therefore everything is properly done, orderly, and that this is now if this attacks the security of people, then this is not a tranquil that attacks security. That is the fourth category, not the third category. The penalties for this last crimes are what we call punishments. Um, uh, uh, Penas or penalties or supplices punishments, right? They are a kind of retaliation which causes the society to refuse to give security to a citizen who has deprived or has wanted to deprive another of it. Okay, this idea of penalties for last crimes are called punishments, and these are usually it's kind of retaliation to impose to refuse to give security. Those who refuse to give security or deprive citizens of their security, that they are penalty. Likewise, this penalty is derived from the nature of the thing and drawn from reason and from the source of good and evil. A citizen deserves death when they violated the security so far as to take or to attempt to take a life. The death penalty is a remedy, as it were, for a sick society. When one violates security with respect to the goods, there can be reasons for a penalty to be capital, but it would perhaps be preferable and it would be more natural if the penalty for the crimes committed against the security of goods were punished by the loss of goods. In other words, there should be, there could be a reason for them when the crime, somebody harm the goods, you might, in other words, require a capital punishment. But it has to be, in other words, it'd be preferable that loss of goods, a crime that involves the loss of goods, the penalty should also be a loss of goods. There should be an equity or balance to the penalty should be punished by the loss of goods, and that ought to be so if fortunes were so common or equal. But as to those who have no goods, more readily attack the goods of others, the corporal penalty has to replace the peculiar penalty. In other words, people who have nothing. This is the problem. This is this is not fair. Rich people can pay with money, and the poor people, they don't have the money to pay. Well, he's saying this is the problem. This is if everything was equal, then you could say that. But because they're not equal, you need to prevent the people with nothing. You have to people who have nothing. Therefore, when they commit a crime, they only have to pay with their bodies and what they have. So therefore, this is a kind of inequality here, but it has to be. It's based on this. Otherwise, if they didn't do that, then what risk would there be? What in other words, they would. In other words, there needs to be a kind of I think there has to be what he says, a kind of balance here, and this is, I think, the point he's trying to make. All that I say is drawn from nature, and is quite favorable to the citizen's liberty. In other words, this nothing here that's been said here would be contrary to the liberty of subjects. You have to address these. You have to balance them. In other words, this is the procedure of this. Now, chapter 5, on certain accusations in particular needs of moderations and prudence. In other words, on certain accusations in particular need of moderation and prudence, right? Important maxim. One must be very circumspect in the pursuit of magic and of heresy. So magic and heresy, witchcraft and heresy. You need to be circumspect. Accusations of these two crimes can offend liberty in the extreme and be a source, the source of infinite tyrannies if the legislature does not know how to limit it. This is the danger. Heresy and witchcraft, magic, witchcraft, and heresy. These two things are, if they go, if you don't, if the legislature pursues this to a degree, it would produce a source of infinite tyranny. So he said, for as it does not bear directly on the actions of citizens, but rather on the idea one has of his character, the accusation becomes dangerous in proportion to the people's ignorance. And from time to time, a citizen is always in danger because the best conduct in the world, the purest morals, and the practice of all one's duties do not guarantee one from being suspected of these crimes. So let us continue. Under Manuel Comenius, the protestator, I think that is it? Yeah, this is an account of the manual of Comenius, right? This is a medieval. The protestor was accused of conspiring against the emperor and using to this end certain secrets that made men invisible. It is said in the life of this emperor that Aaron was caught reading a book of Solomon, and that by reading it, legions of demons would appear. Now, by supposing a power in magic that can arm hell, and starting from this, he who he whom one calls a magician is considered the man in the world most likely to disturb and overthrow society. One is drawn to punish him immeasurably. So this is the idea that the protestor was accused of conspiring against the emperor, and then the idea was that in the life of the emperor, that Aaron was caught reading the Book of Solomon and unleashing devils, and therefore this is the danger of power of it, right? Indignation grows when one includes in magic the power to destroy religion. The history of Constantinople tells us that when a bishop had a revelation that a miracle had ceased because of the magic of a certain individual, that person and his sons were condemned to death. How many prodigious things did this crime not depend? In other words, how many prodigious things did this crime not depend? That it should not be rare for these revelations, that that this bishop had one, that it was true, that there had been a miracle, that this miracle had ceased, and that there is magic, and that magic can overturn religion, and that this individual was a magician, and finally that he had done this act of magic. So these are the questions that had all of them had to in other words, that this is all these things make this problematic, right? The Emperor Theodore Lascaris attributed his illness to magic, and those who accused of it had no other recourse but to handle the hot iron without burning themselves. It would have been a good thing among these Greeks to be a magician in order to vindicate oneself against the accusation of magic. Such was the excess of their ignorance that to the most dubious crimes in the world they joined the most dubious proofs. So therefore, in other words, oh no, you must. This is like a classic Mighty Python joke. If you float, you're a witch. If you drown, you're not a witch. Okay, you drowned, you're not a witch. Okay, right? This is the kind of if you're a magician, the only way you can not be the magician is if you touch the hot iron and not be burned. If you're burned, then you're a magician. Okay, this is what he says. The most dubious crimes in the world, joined by the most dubious proofs. Right? Under the reign of Philip the Tall, the Jews were run out of France, having been accused of allowing lepers to pollute the wells. This absurd accusation certainly could have cast doubts on all accusations founded in public hatred. In other words, this idea. I have not said here that heresy should not be punished. I say that one must be very circumspect. So heresy should be punished, but the punishment should reflect what is being done. It should not be excessive in this sense, and it should. The question, you should be circumspect about punishing it, so that you don't make the thing worse. Okay, because again, the condition of this is that you have, like I said, are you sure? Was there heresy? Was this heresy really done? In other words, again, you have to find the truth of the matter here. Chapter 6 on the crime against nature. We all know what that is, don't we? Wink, wink, wink. Please, God, may I not diminish the horror that one has for a crime that religion, morality, and policy condemn in turn. It would have to be prescribed if it did no more than to give to one sex the weakness of the other and prepare for an infamy old age by a shameful youth. What I say shall what I shall okay. What I shall say will leave it all for the stigma, and will bear only on the tyranny that can take an unfair advantage of even the horror in which it should be held. In other words, this crime of nature, we don't, you know, wink, wink. We all know what it means. And it is in the nature of this crime to be hidden. Legislators have punished it on the disposition of a child. This opened wide the door to calumny, means accusations and falsehood. Justinian said, pro capitis, published a law against this crime. He made inquiries about those who were guilty of it, not only after the law was made, but before. The disposition of a witness, sometimes a child, sometimes a slave, sufficed, especially against the rich and those who were of the faction of the Greens, right? It is singular that among ourselves, three crimes, magic, heresy, and the crime against nature, of which it can be proved that the first does not exist, that the second is susceptible to infinite distinctions, interpretations, and limitations, and that of the third is hidden, were all three punished by the penalty of burning. Were all three punished the penalty of burning, right? So therefore, that's all three of these three things were punished by the burning. I shall assert that the crime against nature will not make much progress in a society unless the people are also inclined to it by some custom, as among the Greeks, where the young people performed all the exercises naked, as among ourselves, where education is at home is no longer the usage, and among the Asians, where some individuals have a large number of wives whom they scorn, while others can have none. Do not clear the way for this crime. Let it be prescribed by an exact police. As are all the violations of mores. In other words, mores, which we treat as a violation of mores, right? And one will immediately see nature either defend her rights or take them back. In other words, you don't need to have. This should be treated as a violation of mores. And here, the violation of mores is you don't use heavily-handed things to do mores. As you go back, you said the violation of mores should be those that kind of restrain themselves and police themselves by a shame and peer pressure and that things. And what we'll say is they will see that one will immediately see that nature will defend her rights or take them back, right? Gentle, pleasing, and charming nature has scattered pleasures with a liberal hand, and by overwhelming us with delight, she prepares us with our children through whom we are born again, as it were, for satisfactions greater than even these delights. So this idea of that, therefore, those who engage in a crime against nature are not going to get this little benefit of this. Okay, therefore, this is the problem here. Nature is gentle, pleasing, and charming. Nature is scattered with liberal hand, and therefore we should be again, be careful about this, about how do you do it. It should be circumspect. Like magic and heresy, we should be circumspect in prosecution of this kind of crime. Chapter 7, the high crime of high treason. The laws of China decide that whomever lack respect for the emperor should be punished by death. As they do not define what lack of respect is, anything can furnish the pretext for taking the life of whoever one wants and for exterminating whatever family one wants. 2 persons charged with writing the court gazette noted some circumstances about a deed where were found out not to be true, and as lying is in a court gazette was said to show lack of respect for the court, they were put to death. When a prince of the blood inadvertently placed a note on the day book signed with the red paintbrush of the emperor, it was decided that he had shown a lack of respect for the emperor, which brought against this family one of the most terrible persecutions of which history has ever spoken. Right? This is 15. This is from the letters of the French. Vagueness in the crime of high treason is enough to make governments degenerate into despotism. I shall treat the subject at length on the book on the compositions of the laws. And this is book 29 near the end, right? So this is very interesting. Very near the end of the laws. On this question that need to be what they need. We should not have vague laws. You have precise laws in this thing. That if you make laws vague, then this would degenerate into despotism. Chapter 8. On the wrong application of the crime of the name of a crime of sacrilege and high treason. In other words, the wrong application of the name of these of the name of the crime of sacrilege and high treason. It is also a violent abuse to give the name of crime of high treason to an act which is not one. A law of the emperor pursued as sacrilege those who called the prince's judgment into question and doubted the merits of those he had chosen for certain employments. The cabinet and the favorites established this crime. In other words, the cabinet and the favorite. Another law declared that those who made an attempt on the prince's ministers and officers were guilty of the crime of treason, as if they had made an attempt on the prince himself. We owe this law to 2 princes whose weakness is famous in history. 2 princes who were led by their ministers as flocks are led by shepherds. 2 princes, slaves in the palace, children in the council, strangers in the army, who preserved the empire only because they gave it away every day. Several of these favorites conspired against their emperors. They did more. They conspired against the empire. They summoned the barbarians. And when one wanted to check them, the state was so weak that it had to violate their law in order to run the risk of committing the crime of treason in order to punish them. Right? This is the danger point about this. This is a bad law. This is bad law. This is that thing. Yet the judge advocate of M.D. Clean Mars relied upon this law when wanting to prove the latter guilty of the crime of treason for attempting to dismiss Cardinal Richelieu from matters of public business. He said, by the constitution of the emperors, the crime touching the person of the prince's ministers is counted of the same weight as one affecting the prince's person. A minister serves both his prince and his state. If he is removed, it is as if the former were deprived of his arms, and the latter a part of his power. If servitude herself arrived on earth, she would not speak otherwise. In other words, this is this idea that you attack the ministers, attack the person, same thing, and therefore this idea that if a minister serves both the prince and state, if he's removed, it is if the former was deprived of the arm and the latter was deprived of his power, right? Another law of Valentinian, Theodotus, and Adachus declares counterfeiters guilty of the crime of high treason. But does this not confuse ideas about things? Does not giving the name of high treason to another crime diminish the horror of the crime of high treason? In other words, there's a danger. If you make everything high treason, then it becomes nothing. If everything is it, then nothing. It in itself is nothing. high treason should be very specific, and therefore that makes the horror of it is. But if everything becomes high treason, then it minimizes the thing of it. Chapter 9, continuation of the same subject. When Paulinus sent word to the Emperor Alexander that he was preparing to pursue as a traitor a judge who had pronounced his order against his orders, a judge who had pronounced against his orders, the emperor answered him that in a century like this, indirect crimes of high treason has no place. Right? This is when Faustinius wrote to the same emperor that having sworn on his life of the prince that he would never pardon his slave, he was obliged to keep his anger alive in order not to make himself guilty of the crime of high treason. The emperor answered him, your terror has been empty, and you do not know my maxims. Okay, this is again this idea that he would never pardon a slave. He was about to keep his anger alive in order to make himself high treason, right, against him. Your terror has been empty. You do not know my maxim. A Senate consult ordered that anyone who had melted down the rejected statues of the emperor would not be guilty of high treason. The emperor Severus Antonius wrote to Pontius that one who sold unconsecrated statues to emperors would not fall under the crimes of high treason. The same emperor wrote to Julius Caecilius that one who chanced to throw a rock at a statue should not be pursued as a traitor. The Julian law required these sorts of modifications, for it had rendered guilty of treason not only those who had melted down the statues of the emperor, but also those who committed similar actions, making this crime arbitrary. Once many crimes of high treason had been established, one necessary had to distinguish among these crimes. And thus, the jurist Lupian, after saying that the accusation of the crime of high treason did not consist on the death of the guilty parties, added that this did not extend at all. That this did not extend to all the crimes of high treason as established by the Julian law, but only to the one that included an attempt on the empire or on the emperor's life. So therefore, in other words, high treason did not cease on the death of the guilty parties. In other words, after saying that the accusation of the crime of high treason did not cease on the death of the guilty parties, this not extend to all crimes, only those that deal with the attempt on the empire or on the emperor's life. So therefore, in other words, the accusation of high treason could go even after the death of the guilty parties, right? This other ones they do, but only these two, right? So that's and chapter 10, the continuation of the same subject. A law in England passed under Henry VIII declared that all those who predicted the king's death were guilty of high treason. This law was very vague. Despotism is so terrible that it even turns those who were to exercise it. Despotism is so terrible that it even turns against those who exercise it. In the last illness of the king, the doctors never dared to say that he was in danger, and no doubt they acted accordingly. Right? This is that. Oh, good. Anyone who predicted the death of the king would be crime. Well, the doctors now have to be quiet. Right? This is that thing about Stalin. Right? Stalin against the doctors. Stalin's war against the doctors. Right. Chapter 11 on thoughts. A certain Marsyas dreamed that he cut the throat of Dionysius. Dionysius had him put to death, saying that Marsyas would have never dreamt it at night if he had not thought it during the day. This was a great tyranny, for even if he had thought it, he had not attempted it. Laws are charged with punishing only external actions. Okay, that's the whole point. This is on thoughts. Thoughts you can think. He says that this is tyranny. If we're punishing people for thoughts, that's tyranny in the aspect. Chapter 12 on indiscreet speech. Nothing makes the crime of high treason more arbitrary than when indiscreet speech becomes its material. Gossip and things like that. Discourse is Discourse is so subject to interpretation. There is so much difference between indiscretion and malice, and so little in the expression they use, that the law can scarcely subject speech to a capital penalty unless it declares explicitly which speech is subject to it. This is, um, again, that it should not be punished that it should not be punished as a crime unless it was sent down in the letter of the law or established by examples of law. This is the Mustium and Law 7, the Digest, right? The Digest, the Roman law. Speech does not form a corpus delicti, a body of acts. Corpus delicti. It remains only an idea. It does not become a corpus delicti. That means it must be an act, something be done. It remains only an idea. Most frequently, it has no meaning in itself, but rather in the tone in which it was spoken. Often, when repeating the same word, one does not express the same meaning. The meaning depends on the link of the words others have with other things. Silence sometimes expresses more than any speech. Nothing is so equivocal. How, then, can one make a speech a crime of high treason? Wherever this law is established, not only is there no longer liberty, there is not even its shadow. Okay, this is the danger of this, right? This is the problem, is that speech is so subjective, tone matters, how it's being said, and also there's a distinction between what is just something that is actually, meant as a thing versus indiscreet speech, something that was said in jest or maybe not seriously or maybe done emotionally, not really thoughting, maybe not as. In other words, this is why there's a speech does not form a corpus delicti. It says it remains an idea. And in the manifesto of the late Tsarina against the family of oligarchy, one prince of this family is condemned to death for speaking indecently of her person, and another for interpreting spitefully her wise arrangements for the empire and of offending her sacred person by disrespectful speech. Right. This is the this is. I do not intend to diminish the indignation one should have against those who would want to stigmatize the glory of their prince. But I do say that if one wants to moderate despotism, punishing with a simple correction will suit these occasions better than the accusation of high treason, which is always terrible, even to the innocent. It is in no way easy to interpret the deceits of language. Right. This is again the digest of Justinian of Roman law. Right. Actionable acts are not an everyday occurrence. They may be observed by many people. A false accusation over facts can be easily clarified. In words that are joined to an act takes on a nature of action. So words that are joined to an act takes the nature of action. Thus, a man who goes into the public square to exhort the subjects to revolt becomes guilty of high treason, because the speech is joined to an act and participates in it. It is not speech that is punishable, but the act committed committed in which speech is used. Speech becomes criminal only when it prepares, when it accompanies, or when it follows a criminal act. Everything is turned upside down if speech is made a capital crime instead of being regarded as the sign of a capital crime. That's very important. He's saying it's speech by itself isn't enough. It's speech tied to an act. It's usually the act that's the crime. And that speech is evidence. In other words, the speech itself isn't the crime, but rather it's the sign of, in other words, that it's sign of the crime, of that sense. The emperors Theodotus, Arcadius, and Honorius wrote to Rufinus, the Praetorian prefect, if someone speaks ill of our person or our government, we do not want to punish him. If he has spoken frivolously, he must be scorned. If it is madness, he must be pitied. If it is an insult, he must be pardoned. Thus, looking at the thing as a whole, you will inform us of it, so that we may judge speeches by persons and weigh carefully whether we should subject them to judgment or ignore them. That's a very good point. In other words, these judges, emperors wrote to Rufinus the praetor, saying that we must, a praetorian perfect is what. Look at what is being said, and he says that if someone speaks ills of our government, of us, what we should do? We should say, look, if it's frivolously scorned, madness pitied, insult, I will pardon them. And must look at the whole of the things, right, and judge them by these things. On writings, chapter 13, writings. Certain writings containing something more permanent than speech. Writing contains something more permanent than speech. But when do they not prepare the way for But when they do not prepare the way for high treason, they are not material for the crime of high treason. Nevertheless, Augustus and Tiberius appended the writings appended to writings the penalty of this crime. Augustus for certain things that were written against illustrious men and women. Tiberius because he believed written against himself. Nothing was more fatal to Roman liberty. Cremitius Cordus was accused because in his annals he had called Cassus the last of the Romans. Satirical writings are scarcely known in despotic states, where dejection on one hand and ignorance on the other produce neither the talent nor the will to write them. In democracy, they are not prevented, for the very reason that they are prohibited in the government of one alone. As they are usually composed against powerful people, they flatter the spitefulness of the people who govern a democracy. In monarchy, they are prohibited, but they have been made the object of police rather than of a crime. So therefore, different type of government, different type of thing. They can amuse the general spitefulness, console malcontents, reduce envy of those in high positions, give people the patience to suffer, and make them laugh about their suffering. This is the role of satirical writings. Right? Aristocracy is the government that most prescribes satirical works. Magistrates there are little sovereigns who are not big enough to scorn insults. If in a monarchy some barb is thrown against the monarch, he is so high that the barb does not reach him. An aristocratic lord is pierced through and through. Thus the Decembrists who formed an aristocracy punished satirical writings with death. 14. The violation of modesty in pursuing punishing crimes. Rules of modesty are observed among almost all the nations of the world. It would be absurd to violate them in punishing crimes, when its purpose should be always to reestablish order. So the purpose of punishment is restoration of order. So therefore, this idea of modesty, preserving modesty, should, in other words, we have to be careful about offending modesty in punishing crimes, right? Did those in the East who exposed women to elephants, trained for an abominable kind of punishment, want to make the law violate the law? In other words, the purpose of law is to establish order. This punishment of exposing women to elephant was the old an old usage of the Roman forbid putting to death girls who were not nubile. Tiberius hit on the expedient of having them raped by their executioner before sending them to their punishment. A crafty, cruel tyrant, he destroyed the Moors in order to preserve the custom. When the Japanese magistracy had naked women exposed in public squares and forced them to walk like beasts, it made modesty tremble. This is like 41. This is from the account of one of the accounts of Indies, right? Indies and that. So that it made modesty tremble. But when it wanted to compel a mother, when it wanted to compel a son, I cannot even go. It made even nature tremble. Okay, this is this idea that the Japanese thing would do such violates the laws of this that it makes nature even like made walk like beasts. It made modesty tremble. But when it to compel a mother, when it wanted to compel a son, I cannot go on. It made even nature tremble. This is that very powerful. Again, modesty. This is that law should, again, the punishment should not do to make things horrible. That's a despotic rule. Things that will destroy modesty, things that bring that would make nature tremble. This violates the established order of things. Punishment reestablishes order. That's the whole point of it. It's not designed for terror. It is to establish order, establish tranquility. Chapter 15 on freeing the slaves in order to accuse the master. Augustus established that the slaves of those who had conspired against him would be sold to the public so that they could make dispositions against their masters. Against him would be sold to the public so they could be against dispositions against their masters. Nothing should be neglected that leads to the discovery of a serious. Nothing should be neglected that leads to the discovery of a serious crime. Thus, in a state where there are slaves, it is natural for them to be informers, but they cannot be witnesses. Vindex denounced a conspiracy in support of the Tarquins, but he was not. But he was not a witness against the children of Brutus. To give liberty to one who had rendered such a great service to his homeland was just, but liberty was not given to him so that he would render this service to his homeland. Thus, the Emperor Tacitus ordered that slaves would not be witnesses against their masters, even in the crime of high treason. A law that was not put into Justinian's companion. This idea here. Chapter 16: Slander in the crime of high treason. One must be just to the Caesars. They were not the first to imagine the sad laws that they made. It was Sulla who taught them that slanderers must not be punished. Soon one went so far as to reward them. Okay, so this is the danger of slanderers. Chapter 17. Therefore, Caesars aren't the things. He's saying that Sulla taught that slanderers must not be punished and that they must be rewarded, and therefore this is that warning about this is that problem. In chapter 17 on revealing conspiracies. Revealing conspiracies. If thy brother or thy son or thy daughter or their wife of thy bosom or thy friend, which is as thine own soul, and entice thee secretly, saying, "Let us go to other gods," thou shalt stone him. Thine hand shall be the first upon him, and afterwards the hand of all the people. This law of Deuteronomy cannot be a civil law among most of the peoples that we know, because it would open the door to all crimes. So the Deuteronomy cannot be done to everyone. This is the in other words, that this would open to the law of all crimes. So this is criticism of this idea. The law in many states that ordered that on the penalty of death one reveals in the conspiracies in which one did not have a hand is scarcely less harsh. It is very suitable to restrict this law when it is carried into a monarchical government. This idea of conspiracies. How do you punish conspiracies? That if you did not have a hand in them, it should be applied. In other words, it should be. In other words, it is very suitable to restrict this law when this is carried a monarchical government. It should be applied there in all of its severity only to the crime of high treason in the first degree. That is active. In such states, It is very important not to confuse different degrees of this crime. So therefore, only the direct act of this, not like other parties. In China, in Japan, where the law upsets all ideas of human reason, the failure to reveal a crime is considered a crime in most ordinary cases. An account tells us of the two young ladies who were shut up in a box studded with nails until they died. The one for having some intrigue of gallantry, uh, for having had some intrigue of gallantry, the other for not revealing it. So therefore, this is that Japan. This count from Japan tells of two young ladies who were shut up in a box and nails until they died, right? Because one had some kind of intrigue and the other one knew about it but didn't say it, right? So this is the danger of this. There's something more, you have to be careful. This is the danger. This is something, if you push these kind of things, this pushes the scope of despotic government. It makes it less free. Chapter 18, how dangerous it is in republics to punish excessively crimes of high treason. So there's, you have to be careful here. When a republic has destroyed those who wanted to upset it, it must hasten to put an end to vengeances, penalties, and even rewards. In other words, you have to be careful. If you put down a rebellion, in a republic, if someone starts a rebellion, once you've dealt with it, you must put an end to vengeances, penalties, and even rewards. Why? One cannot inflict great punishments and consequently take and make great changes without putting a great power in the hands of few citizens. It is better then, in this case, to pardon many than to punish many, to exile few than to exile many, to leave men their goods than to multiply confiscations. On the pretext of avenging the republic, one would establish a tyranny of the avengers. It is not a question of destroying the one who dominates, but of destroying domination. Right? This is the thing about it. It is not a question of trying to destroy one who dominates, but the one of domination. One must return as quick as possible to the ordinary pace of government, where the laws protect all and are armed against no one. The Greeks put no limit to the vengeances they wreaked on tyrants or whom they suspected on being tyrants. They put children to death, sometimes 5 of the closest relatives. They drove out an infinite number of families. Their republics were shaken by this. Exile and return of the exiles were always periods marking a change in the constitution. The Romans were risers. When Cassius was condemned for aspiring tyranny, the question was put of putting his children to death was raised. His children were not condemned to any penalty. Those who wanted to change this law at the end Those who wanted to change this law at the end of the war with the Maasai and of the Civil War, and then exclude from public officials the children who had of those who prescribed by Sulla are certain criminals, says Dionysius of Heraclianus. In other words, in the wars of Marsyas and Sulla, one sees the extent to which the souls of the Romans had gradually been depraved. Things are so lamentable that one believed they would not be seen again. But under the triumvirate, one wanted to be triumvirate, as the Caesar, both triumvirates, right? First Caesar, Pompey, and Cassius, and then later Octavian, Anthony, and I forget the other guy. That one wanted to be more cruel and appear less so. The sophisms that were used by cruelty are distressing to see. The formulas for prescription is found in Appian 52. Yeah, the Civil War. Appian's kind of the Civil War. Um, you would say that one has there no other purpose than the good republic. So coolly does one speak there. So coolly does one speak there. So many advantages does one show, So preferable to others are the means one takes. So surely will the rich be. So tranquil will the common people be. So much does one fear to put the citizens' life in danger. So much does one not want to pacify the soldiers. Finally, so happy, uh, 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 so happy will one be. So therefore, this is the danger here, right? That one thing leads to the other. That you will say that no other purpose for than the good of the republic. Then what is it? Advantages, and then speak of the advantages that shows to that so preferable to other means to secure the rich should be done, to tranquil the common people, to put the does so much does one fear to put the citizens' lives in danger, to pacify the soldiers. Rome was drowned in blood when Lepidus triumphed over Spain, and triumphed over Spain, and by an unexampled absurdity, he ordered the people to rejoice over the triumph on penalty of prescription. So, in other words, if you didn't um, give him a triumph, you would have been prescribed. Okay, um, chapter 19. How the uses of liberty is suspended in a republic. There are in the states where one sets the most store by liberty laws that violate it for a single person in order to keep it for all. Okay. In other words, there is in other words, how the uses of liberty is suspended in the republic. How do you do this? In other words, there are statutes, there are states where one sets most store by liberty, laws violate for one person to keep for all. Such are what are called the bills of attainder in England. They are related to the law to those laws of Athens that were extracted against the individual, provided that they were made by the vote of 6,000 citizens. In other words, it's ostracism, right? They were related to the laws made in Rome against the individual, whom they called privileges, right? They were made only in the great estates of the people. But however the people made them, Cicero wanted them abolished because the force of law consists only in its being enacted for everyone. Right? This idea. I admit, however, that the usage of I admit that the usage of the freest people that ever lived on earth make me believe that there are certain cases where a veil has to be drawn for a moment over liberty, as one hides the statues of the gods. So therefore, this is a weird thing. He's saying that the English are the most free, but they also have the built in. Why? Because this is designed that these individual people, basically, Tainer is designed under English law against the great powerful actors who are usually above the law by their power, and that therefore to preserve the liberty of everyone, this needs to be done. And this is the point he says here, right? That he says that Cicero didn't like those kind of things to be done, right? That he thought they were dangerous. That law should be universally treated. Law is everyone should be under the law, and law should be universally thing. But then even he breaks the law against the conspiracy of Catilinus, right? That this is that even that weird moment he breaks the law to preserve the republic, right? He says, I admit, however, that the usage of the freest people that ever lived on earth makes me believe that there are cases where a veil has to be drawn for a moment over liberty, as one hides the statue of the gods against this brutal act of dealing with this problem. Chapter 20, on the laws favorable to citizens' liberty in a republic. It often happens in popular states that accusations are made in public, and any man is permitted to indict whomever he wants. This has brought about the establishment of laws proper to the defense of the innocence of the citizens. In Athens, the accuser who did not get a fifth of the votes for his side paid a fine of 1,000 drachma. Ascenes, who had accused Christophon, was condemned for this. In Rome, an unjust accusation was branded with infamy, and the letter K was stamped on his forehead. Guards were kept on accusers so that he would not be in a position to corrupt the judges or witnesses. I have already spoken of the Athenian and Roman law that permitted one indicted to go into exile before the judgment. So that you could, if you were indicted, you could just go away, exile. In other words, these are principles by which procedures which protected. In other words, false accusations are punished. False accusations, and people who really commit false accusations have to be punished by the law. In fact, Rome was even they'd brand a K if you were on your head that you were like this, and guys were kept on the accuser so that he would not be in a position to corrupt people, witnesses or judges. Right. Chapter 21 on the cruelty of the laws concerning debtors in a republic. Okay, the question of what to do with debtors. Right. One citizen has already gained a great superiority over another citizen by lending silver that the latter had borrowed only to distribute it, and that consequences he no longer has. What will happen? What will happen in a republic if the laws increase this servitude still more? In other words, in the republic will create this. In Athens and Rome, it was first permitted to sell debtors who were not in a position to pay. Solon corrected this usage in Athens. He ordered no one be obliged by his person, obligated by his person for civil debts. But the Decemvirs did not simultaneously reform the Roman usage, and although they had Solon's regulation before their eyes, they refused to follow it. This is not the only place where the laws of the 12 Tables, where one sees that the design of the Decemvirs ran counter to the spirit of democracy. Cruel laws concerning debtors often endangered the Roman Republic. A man covered with sores escaped from the house of his creditors and appeared on the square. This is that famous in one of the images, right? The people were so moved by the spectacle, other citizens left their prisons where their creditors did no longer dare hold them. Promises were made, but they were broken. People withdrew to the sacred mount. The people gained, instead of the abrogation of these laws, a magistrate to defend them. One was moving away from anarchy. One risked falling into tyranny. Manliness, in order to make himself popular, was going to take from the hand of their creditors the citizens who had been reduced to slavery. One prevailed against his design, but an evil remained. Particular laws facilitated payments by debtors, and yet in Roman year 328, the consuls prescribed a law that took away creditors' right to hold debtors in servitude of their houses. A usurer named Appius had wanted to corrupt the modesty of a young man named Publius, whom he had kept in irons. The crime of Sextus gave Rome political liberty. That of Appius gave it civil liberty. Okay, so Sextus Tyrannus is rape of Lucrece led to this. That the way Appius wanted to corrupt Publius, the modesty of the young man and kept in irons. This led to the civil liberty. It was Rome's fate that new crimes confirmed the liberty that old crimes had procured for it. The attempt of Appius on Virgilia revived in the people the horrors of the tyrants inspired by them by Lucretia's misfortune. 37 years after the crime of the infamous Papyrus, a similar crime made the people withdraw to the Gencrium, which renewed the force of the law and made for the security of debtors. Subsequently, more creditors were punished by debtors for violating the law made against usurers than debtors were pursued for not having paid the debt. So that's how the flipping of the situation, flipping of the power, right? That originally that it was abused by this principle was first abused by the creditors against the debtors, and later against the debtors against the creditors, right? Chapter 22, on the things that attack liberty and monarchy. The least useful thing in the world to a prince has often weakened liberty in monarchies. The commissioner, sometimes named to judge In other words, the least useful thing in the world of the prince is often liberty. The commissioner is sometimes named to judge an individual. The prince has so little use of commissioners that it is not worthwhile for him to change the order of things for their sake. It is morally certain that he has more of the spirit of intrigue and justice than his commissioners. The king has more of a spirit of integrity and justice. The king, the more in it is morally certain that the king has better integrity and justice than his commissioner, who always believe themselves sufficiently justified by orders, by hidden interests of the state, by having been chosen, and even by their fears. Under Henry VIII, when a peer was tried, he was to be judged by a commission drawn from the House of Lords. With this method, one puts to death all the peers he wanted. So therefore, this is the idea that you create a commissioner. Commissioner can do that. The monarch is better in that sense. Chapter 23 on spies in monarchy. Must there be spies in monarchies? It is not ordinary practice. It is not the ordinary practice of good princes. When a man is faithful to the laws, he has satisfied what he owes to the prince. He must at least have his house as an asylum, and to be secure about the rest of his conduct. Spying would perhaps be terrible if it could be exercised by honest people, but the necessary infamy of the person can make the thing be judged infamous. A prince should act towards his subjects with candor, frankness, and trust. In other words, the prince should act towards his subjects with candor, frankness, and trust. He who has so many anxieties, suspicions, and fears is an actor who plays his role awkwardly. So therefore, if someone is anxious, suspicion, and fears, they're going to play his role. When he sees that, in general, the laws are enforced and respected, he can judge himself secure. The general demeanor speaks to him for the demeanor of all individuals. So therefore, in other words, this general demeanor of the situation. Let him have no fear. He cannot believe how readily he is loved. Indeed, why would one not love him? He is the source of almost all the good that is done, and almost all punishing is the responsibility of the laws. The laws, in other words, not him who punishes, the laws punish, right? And remember, he's not judging. He's not. Remember, that's the important thing about monarchy. Monarchy should never be the judge, because when the judge is, then the blood is on his hand, right? Um, uh, uh, all the punishing is responsibility of the laws. He shows himself to the people only with a sincere countenance. His very glory is communicated to us, and his power sustains us. A proof that that one loves him is that one trusts him. And what a minister refuses, one always imagines the prince would have gained. Okay, again, the minister refuses it. Well, the prince would have given this, right? No, sees that as that. Oh, if only Stalin knew, right? Um, Even during public comedies, one does not accuse his person. One complains that he is unaware of them, or that he is importuned by corrupt people. If only the prince knew, says the people. These words are a kind of invocation and proof of their trust in him. Now, on chapter 24, anonymous letters. The Tartar are obliged to put their names on their arrows, so that the hands from whom they had come, from that the hands from which they had come can be known. When Philip of Macedonia was wounded at the siege of a town, one found on the javelin, Astor gave this mortal blow to Philip. If those who accuse a man, if those who accuse a man did it with a view to the public good, they would not accuse him before the prince, for he can be easily prejudiced. Instead, They would go before the magistrates, whose rules are fearsome only to slanderers. For if they do not want to leave the laws between themselves and the accused, it proves that they have causes to fear the laws, and and at least and the least penalty that might be inflicted on these men to is not to believe them. Right? They don't believe them. One can pay attention to them only in cases that one can pay attention to them only in cases that cannot tolerate the delays of ordinary justice, or when it is a question of the prince's safety. So in other words, if they do not, in other words, you can, if they do not want to leave the laws between them and the accused, it proves that they have cause to fear the laws, and that the least penalty might inflict on these men is not to believe in them. Right? You don't believe these people. Okay? You don't believe these people. The least penalties, I'm not going to believe you. One can pay attention to them only in cases that does not delay the ordinary delay. In other words, if there's the delay. In other words, that a situation where the ordinary delays of justice would be too dangerous, or the prince's safety. In that instant, one can believe that the accuser has made an effort that loosened his tongue and made him talk. But in other cases, one must say with the Emperor Constantius, we cannot suspect a man who has no accuser, though he does not lack enemies. In other words, we cannot suspect a man who has no accusers, although he does not lack enemies. Right? Let's look at chapter 25 on the manner of governing in a monarchy. Royal authority is a great spring. Royal authority is a great spring that should move easily and noisily. The Chinese praise one of their emperors who govern, they say, like the heavens. That is by example, like the heavens by example. Right? In other words, the royal authority is both ease, move, and noise makes noise. It's and that what is it? The Chinese praise the emperor like the heavens as by example. There are cases when power should act to its full extent. So there are cases where power should act to its full extent. There are cases when it should act within its limits. And administration is subtle if it is well aware what part of power, great or small, should be used in various circumstances. So, in other words, administration is sublime, knowing that should I use power in its full extent or should I limit it? This is a judgment. This is the idea of subtlety in it. In our monarchies, all felicity lies in the people's opinion of the gentleness of the government. An unskillful minister always wants to tell you that you are slaves. In other words, he wants to always, an unskillful minister will tell you that you are slaves. But if that were so, he should seek to keep it from being known. He can say or write nothing to you. He can say or write nothing to you except that the prince is angry, that he is surprised, that he will restore order. Okay, in other words, that he can say nothing or say or write nothing to you except that a prince is angry, he is surprised, or sort of. In a certain way, command is easy. The prince must encourage, and the laws must menace. This is from Tacitus, right? Nevera ease the weight of the empire. Right? This is from Agricola. Right? Famous law Tacitus. Chapter 26, that in a monarchy the prince should be accessible. Right? In the monarchy the prince should be accessible. This will be much better felt by contrast. Tsar Peter I, says Lord Perry, has made a new ordinance that forbid presenting him with a request before presenting it twice before his officer. Can one, in the case of denial of justice, present it to him a third time? But if he who presents it is wrong, he must lose his life. Since that time, no requests have been made no request had been addressed to the czar. So therefore, this is a dangerous. Like this, he gives a negative example. This is like, okay, Tsar Peter I said, okay, you must, before you can present me, you must do it two times there. And if you present to me, but he who presented is wrong, he must lose his life. No one presents it. This is a very bad thing in that sense. The prince must be accessible because he's the champion of justice and champion. Okay, chapter 7, the mores of the monarch. The mores of the prince contribute as much to liberty as do its laws. Like the laws, the prince can make beasts of men and men of beasts. If he loves free souls, he will have subjects. If he loves common souls, he will have slaves. Does he want to know the great art of ruling? Let him bring honor and virtue close to him. Let him call forth personal merit. He can sometimes even cast his eye towards the talented. Let him not fear his rivals, who are called men of merit. He is their equal once he loves them. Let him win the heart. Let him not capture the spirit. Let him make himself popular. He should be flattered by the love of the least of his subjects. They are all men. The people ask so little attention that it is just to grant it to them. The infinite distance between the sovereign and the people keeps them from disturbing him. Yet let him yield to prayers, but be firm against demands. Let him know that his people benefits from his refusals, as does his courtiers from his favors. In other words, the people benefit from his refusals, as do the courtiers benefits from his favors. In other words, this idea that he says no to this because the people benefit. And he says, in other words, the courtiers want something, people want something, they want something. But by him saying no, he's ensuring that the people are protected in that sense, or the people are benefiting. So this is the mores. The character and mores of the rulers is about liberty and monarchy. Chapter 28 regards the monarch owe their subjects. This is interesting. They must be extremely restrained in their banter. It flatters when it is moderate because it provides the means of becoming familiar. But a caustic banter is much less permissible to them than to the least of their subjects, because they are the only ones whose always wound mortally. In other words, the powerful king, if he does something harsh to the person, can wreck the person. Right? That's why you be careful about this. Even less should they conspicuously insult one of their subjects. They are established to pardon, to punish, never to insult. Okay. When they insult their subjects, they treat them more cruelly than the Turk or the Muscovite treats his. When the latter insults someone, they humble and do not dishonor. As for monarchs, they both humble and dishonor. Remember, honor is the principle of this. And if I criticize them, I strip them of their honor, right? Such is the prejudice of those of the East, that they consider an affront by the prince to be the result of paternal goodness. In other words, the prejudice of those of the East, that they consider an affront to the prince to be a result of paternal goodness. And such is our way of thinking, that we join to the bitter feelings resulting from this affront, the despair of being unable to clear ourselves of it. So therefore, this was that the East, the Prince Rebel is kind of like something good about you. Right? Here, this demoralizes you, it destroys you. You can't clear yourself of it. They should be charmed to have subjects whose honor is dearer to them than life, and is no less a motive for faithfulness than of courage. One can recall misfortunes that had befallen princes as the result of insulting their subjects. The vengeance of Clerias, the eunuchs of Narns, and of Count Julian. Finally, the Duchess of Montpellier, who enrage at Henry III for having revealed some of her secret feelings vexed him for the rest of his life. In other words, Chapter 29. The civil law is appropriate for putting a little liberty in a despotic government. Although despotic government um, in its nature is everywhere the same, yet circumstances, a religious opinion, a prejudice, a received example, a turn of mind, manners, mores can leave considerable difference among them. So, in other words, despotic governments, they look the same, but these things, like they look the nature the same, yet circumstances, religious opinion, prejudice, received examples, a turn of mind, manners, mores, and these can leave this difference among them. As it is well for certain ideas to be established in them. Thus, in China, a prince is regarded as the father of the people. And at the beginning of the empire of the Arabs, the prince was their preacher. Right? It is suitable for there to be some sacred books that act as a rule, like the Quran for the Arabs, the Book of Zoroaster for the Persians, the Veda for the Indians, and the classics for the Chinese. The religious code replaces the civil code and fixes what is arbitrary. So therefore, remember, in despotics, there's no law is basically will to caprice. So religious replaces the law. Right? Religious code replaces civil code and fixes what is arbitrary. It is not bad for judges to consult the ministers of religion in cases that are unclear. Thus, in Turkey, the Qadis questions the mullahs. And if the case merits death, the particular judge, if there is one, may also suitably seek the advice of the governor, so that the civil power and the ecclesiastic power are further tempered by political authority. Right? This is this sense. Chapter 30, continuation of the same suspect about despotic government. Right? It is despotic rage that has established that the father's disgrace would involve the disgrace of the children and wives. The latter are already unfortunate without being criminal. And besides, the prince must leave supplicants between the accused and himself to soften his wrath and enlighten his justice. In the Maldives, it is a good custom for the lord who is disgraced to pay daily court to the king until he is returned to favor. His presence disarms the prince's wrath. There are despotic states in which it is thought that speaking to a prince on behalf of a disgraced man is to lack the respect due to the prince. These princes seem to make every effort to deprive themselves of the virtue of mercy. Arcadis and Honorius, in the law for which I have spoken up at length, declare that they will not pardon those who dare entreat them on behalf of guilty men. This law is very bad, for it is bad even in despotism. So this in other words, even in despotism, this idea that you punish those who would speak for the guilty or speak for the condemned. You should. This is even bad. This law is very bad, for it is bad even in despotism. The Persian custom that permitted anyone to leave the kingdom who wants to is very good. And although the opposite usage had its origin in despotism, where subjects were regarded as slaves, those who left were regarded as fugitive slaves. Nevertheless, the Persian practice is very good in despotism, where fear of the people fleeing or departing with what they owe checks or moderates persecutions of the pashas and the extortioners. So, in other words, this is how letting the people flee, allowing them to flee. This is a moderating force on the despotic rule. Typically, despotic rules don't treat the people as slaves. Here, this is why this principle is a good principle, moderating even in tyranny. Okay, we ended the chapter here with this. If you have any questions and comments, please put them on. This is the liberalism of Montesquieu. This is where Montesquieu shows his support of the idea of civil liberties and the idea of where liberty is found in terms of individuals in the relationship to the state and the society, and how this affects, how even the freedom of people affects the stability of freedom of the government, and the different governments, how they how the treatment of citizens and subjects affect each type of government he's dealt here. So, any comments or questions or things or points you want to raise, please put them there below. This was a long video. I'm sorry again. These were the big chapters. If you have any other specific questions there like this, if you like it, please share it and pass it to people. Bring other people's attention to this. If you didn't like it, you can say that, but say why in the comments. You can, if you've not subscribed, please subscribe. If you encourage others, you are subscribed, to bring that. Please bring this attention to your friends and other people, that maybe they might find this useful. This is again doing this. You can follow me on social media, links below. If you want to help me to keep on doing these kind of videos and stuff like this, you can help me by subscribe to our Patreon. Whatever, or you can buy one of my books that are listed below. Again, links are listed below. Okay, now we turn to the last chapter of part. Next time we'll turn to chapter 13, book 13, which deals with the last part of book 2 in our next video. Again, we post these on Mondays and Wednesdays, Montesquieu things. There'll be something else published on Tuesdays and Thursdays of this series, because I like this. We're currently, and this is the Schmidt stuff. We'd be doing some Schmidt, and then on Fridays at noon at Eastern Standard Time, America, or Eastern Standard Time, or 6 p.m. Central European Time, we do our live stream. As I mentioned, there was the videos. We had problems with live stream last week. I mean, when you see this was it may not be at the same time. So there was 1 week I had a problem with live stream. Oh God, I'm trying to hope that this problem won't happen again. Okay, on that, we'll see you guys and have a good day. Take care. Bye bye.